Hi, everyone. Doc T here with another episode of the Horse Advocate Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. Today's subject is building muscle using protein. And I'm just like thrilled because I can't tell you how many times. I mean, I'd be a millionaire if I got $1 for every time somebody answered the question, how do you build muscle? And almost without exception, they'll say, you build muscle by exercise, by training the horse, by moving it up and down hills, by doing the sport, by training in whatever competition that you're doing. And that's about 20% of it. And you have to understand that. I used to tell people that if you wanted to build a barn at your house and I delivered a huge truck's load of lumber, and behind that was a busload of workers, every one of them with a hammer ready to go, you'd be thrilled. So the busload of workers are the exercise format, and the wood on the semis are the structure of the muscles, ligaments, tendons, and bones of your horse. And you'd be thrilled until you found out that I didn't bring any nails with me. And without nails, you can't put it together. And that's what protein is. And I found it interesting because I listened to a podcast. As you know, I listen to podcasts everywhere. And all this information is coming from humans with some corollaries to other animals that they've discussed, including fish, which I found fascinating. But it's mostly humans. I don't know if anybody's doing this research in horses. If they are, please let me know, because I need to know this. But it's a long podcast, and I took notes, and I'm going to run through them because I have some highlights. But I want to lay the groundwork. If you've been following me for any length of time, you know that I've been talking about proteins and fats as substrates and sugar as a substrate. And this is a word I haven't used much. Substrate, I've heard it a million times, but I'm starting to use it now because people get a little bogged down in the word fuel and energy. And I want you to understand that a substrate is something that is converted by the body into a fuel that is then converted into something that is burned, and the result is a burst of energy that can be used to power the cell. All right. So the crude oil pumped from the ground doesn't do anything for your car. It has to be refined and turned into a fuel. And that fuel is usually stored until you turn the engine on. And then there's a pump that pumps that fuel into your engine, combusts, and boom, you have a spark that drives you down the road. It's really not that much different. But one of the things interesting that I want you to understand is that during exercise, your body's going to choose what substrate to use. And that really sums it up, because we all think that we want to feed grain for energy. We want to add the calories from sugar to give our horse that boosted energy. And this podcast is to help you understand a couple of things. One, it's not about calories. If you look at a donut, and the donut at Dunkin' Donuts says 350 calories if you eat this donut, you're going to say, oh my gosh, that's going to be more calories than I need. Then you look at a chunk of cheese, and that has 300 calories. And you're like, all right, so the chunk of cheese looks smaller, it's denser. I don't know which one's going to satisfy me more. Which one's going to give me more energy? Which one do I really want for my fuel? Because I know Dr. Tucker's been saying it's sugar and fat that we use for fuels. And then over next to that is a piece of protein. And I know some of you listening to this are vegans or vegetarians. But I want you to take that off the table right now and just understand protein. So if I say a sizzling steak you can replace that with your 10 bowls of quinoa, which will have about the same amount of protein. And you can say, okay, look at the calories in that. Of course, the steak is going to have calories from fat, and your quinoa is not going to have as many calories. But what is a calorie? I've had a podcast on that. The Advanced Nutrition course, which hasn't been published yet, has a whole thing on calories. And calories just means that if you throw whatever food that we're looking at into this special device and it burns it completely, combusts it to nothing but ashes and gas, the amount of energy that's released by that burning is measured. It's measured against a certain volume of water, and the temperature raises that water. But that has nothing to do with whether you gain or lose body fat. So you need to take the word calories and really just throw it out the window. There's a first law of thermodynamics that says calories in equals calories out. And I've heard this a million times. But I try to tell you that calories in times these factors equals calories out times these factors. And calories out can be exercise, calories in can be donuts, whatever. But it's what's in these factors that makes all the difference in the world. And I'm going to try to explain that to you. Okay. When you're just sitting here listening to this and you're doing nothing, maybe driving down the road, spending some energy up in your brain, or you're sitting in the tack room and you've worked hard, but you're just sitting down, chilling, or maybe you're mucking stalls and working, regardless. You're burning fuel to keep your posture or keep the movement going. And that fuel is inside every muscle cell. And inside that muscle cell are mitochondria that are burning that fuel and creating these sparks of energy. And I want you to know that that cell has only a limited amount of space for fat and for sugar. And as long as there's fat and sugar coming into that cell, the cell is fine. It's when you fill up that cell with all the sugar and all the fat that it can hold that it will signal that cell to no longer absorb sugar into it. And that's what we call insulin resistance. But it also doesn't allow any more fat to come in the cell. It's saturated. No more can get in there. And the cell basically shuts down. And then when you ask it to do something, it has a choice of using sugar or fat. And if the cell has been primed correctly, it will start to use the fat in the cell. And as it does, the fat storage decreases. And as it decreases, it's going to tell the fat cell of the body, which is way over someplace else, to start to release the fat from there because I know I'm going to need more fuel. And that fat, as it's released, comes flowing through the blood and enters the cell and starts to fill up those fat reserves again. And that's good. But if the fat's coming in and the tiger is coming around the corner, the bear, whatever, the threat has come, and you have to move pretty fast, or your sport says the gun's gone off and you've got to gallop at high speed, the horse is going to say, okay, the fat's coming in, I get it, but because we're not getting the fat from the fat cell yet, that takes time. We've called Amazon for a fat delivery, and it's coming, but it's not there yet. It's going to go to two places for some quick energy. One, any sugar that you've put into the body is going to be consumed by the cell and burned up pronto. And if you don't have a sugar load in there, it's going to go to glycogen. It's going to use the sugar. Boom. Everything's fine. Now, I've gone over this before in previous podcasts. I just thought a refresher would be helpful. So if you've limited the amount of sugar that's available in the blood and in the glycogen stores, the horse is going to burn through that and get exhausted, but hopefully there's enough fat to carry him through. And the art of being a good trainer is balancing that out, making sure the horse has enough sugar to keep moving and to get the sugar back in the system restored for round 2 or for the next day, if it's a long type thing. But there is plenty of sugar in the liver stored as glycogen and in the muscle stored as glycogen to be used by the muscle cell to burn and keep going down the road. So if your horse is trained well, it's going to start using up the fat early in the competition. And as it uses it up, it's going to trickle in a little bit of glucose, but it's going to be bringing fat in from the fat cell, and that's going to flow in. And that's how muscles work. Now, if you build the amount of muscles that are on your horse, you're going to just by definition, build the supply or build the storage ability of the muscle for glycogen or extra glucose and for fat. So the more muscle you have, the more fat stores and glucose stores as glycogen inside the cell. And I think that's really good. So I just wanted you to understand that simple thing before I move into protein, because protein can be used as a fuel. And you don't want to use protein as a fuel. It's not a very good source. It's hard. And it's not there for that. You have to remember that proteins are made up of amino acids. And this presenter said there's 20 or 22 amino acids, 9 of which are called essential. He did not use the word conditionally essential, which I found interesting because others are talking about conditional essentials, meaning that you have to have the essential amino acid that's converted into this other amino acid before it can be used. Example in horses is methionine comes in, that's an essential amino acid, but the horse can't use it. It converts it into cysteine and then into cysteine, and then they use cysteine to build the strength of the hoof. Okay, so that's a conditional, but he doesn't talk about it, which I thought was really interesting. They want you to understand that, in fact, he thinks that all proteins are essential. And it's a good argument, actually, because proteins are so important. They do everything. They not only build muscle, but they build everything in your body. I mean, everything in your body has a protein either as part of it or they help bring the materials to build it. For instance, fats and waters don't mix. Anybody who's been in the kitchen knows that. You've seen fat float on water all the time. You can't mix it. You can stir it up, but it all bubbles out. So to get fat to move through the blood, it has to be bound to a protein. And these proteins help carry these fats through the blood. They're called lipoproteins. And proteins are no different than fats and sugars in the fact that they all three have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. But in the protein, they add an amino group, which is just basically nitrogen, and they have a carboxyl group at the other end. I don't know anything about chemistry. You probably don't know either, so let's not even talk about that. Okay, so they talk about really something interesting. They said that in humans, we synthesize about 300 grams of protein on a daily basis. Now, if you forget what a gram is, just know that there are 454 grams per pound, 454. So 300 grams is less than a pound that we create, that we use. So in other words, we're synthesizing protein, which could be enzymes, it could be immunoglobulins, it could be neurotransmitters. I mean, we're constantly building these proteins, and there's like 30,000 of them in a cell or something ridiculous. Different proteins, there's like billions of proteins in a cell. It's just, that's beyond my scope of imagination to think that there's that many. But we're, as humans, only ingesting between 70 and 100 grams of protein in a day. So what he's saying is there's 230 grams of protein that is being recycled. And I've mentioned this before, that proteins are constantly being broken down. They build this protein and then it breaks down. Neurotransmitters break down in a matter of nanoseconds. They fire off and they're destroyed. And then those amino acids come back to the cell and they're reassembled. It's just like letters. We have all these letters and we can make as many different words as we want with these letters using proper syntax. And that's just fascinating. So where's this pool of recycled amino acids? And nobody actually knows where it is. They know that muscle itself is your storage of amino acids, just in solid form. And you don't want to use your muscle for fuel, but you will if you're starving, basically. So if you, as they said in here, if you're put in a concentration camp, which I thought was an interesting way of putting it, but if your animal starts to starve, they'll use up all the body fat and then they'll go to the muscle and they will break down the amino acids, but they won't recycle them. They'll put them into the food chain and give ourselves energy. So that's how they do it. So what's interesting is we build all the proteins that we need. So we're really sustainable. I remember in one of the earlier podcasts, I said, you don't have to eat glucose, because we can make the glucose. And the way we make glucose is we take substrates, one of which is protein, and we blow off the amine group, which is nitrogen, and we turn the remaining molecule into either fat or sugar, and it's usually sugar. If you eat excessive protein, everyone's been saying, oh, what happens if you feed too much protein? It's going to break down and blow out the kidneys. Well, it won't. It'll just be turned into sugar. And then the sugar is going to be stored as fat. So if you eat too much protein and you start gaining weight, it's because you're eating more sugar than your body needs, and it has to convert it over to fat. What I found also interesting is that they labeled the carbon in the amino acid with a radioactive carbon. And it's not the radioactive that bubbles up and blisters you and kills you. This is a non-reactive, but easily identifiable. They call it carbon-13. And they found out that muscles are changing every 50 to 100 days. So the muscle that's in my arm right here, if you guys can see it, is not the same muscle that was there 3 months ago. It has been completely redone. And that brought up a very interesting question. Why don't we change form? Why is our shape the same? Why are the muscles still there? A surgeon can go into you at 2 years of age, 20 or 80, and he's going to find the muscle bellies that he's looking for in that surgery, because the muscle bellies stay the same. Ligaments and tendons stay the same, but the materials that make them up are completely turned over. All your blood cells turn over in a short period of time. They actually labeled the cells of the brain and then took brain biopsies of people who were having brain surgery. And they said, yes, please take a tissue of it. So they took this radioactive carbon and they found that your brain changes every 3 weeks. So what's in your skull right now is completely rebuilt every 3 weeks. And that blows everybody's mind, because how do we preserve all our memories? How do we preserve our ability to speak? I mean, take a comedian, for instance. In 3 weeks, does he lose his ability to be a comic? No. So we haven't been able to understand that, but we have understood beyond any reasonable doubt that almost everything in our body is changing. And this is where it comes to how to build muscle. And I know I'm slowly getting you to where I want you to be, but I want you to understand that maybe some of you have learned about branched chain amino acids, the BCAAs. You'll see them at the health food store, BCAAs. And the 3 amino acids that are branched chain are leucine, isoleucine, and valine. And leucine is the biggie. Leucine comes in and it actually stimulates the muscle to grow. And if you recall back to a podcast I did years ago about rapamycin and mTOR, is a really interesting story how they found out all about this. this rapamycin. It was a bacteria that they found in Rapa Nui, which was Easter Island, and they didn't know what to do with it. It was excellent at killing toe fungus. So it was incorporated in toe fungus medicines, and then that was taken off the market because the company went belly up. And then it was brought into the US, and they found out that they could use it for preventing rejection of transplanted organs. So they basically painted it in this rapamycin, and you can put a liver or heart or whatever, and there's a much better chance that the body would accept it. Fascinating little thing, right? But they still didn't know what rapamycin did until somebody found out that there was this target of rapamycin called mechanistic target of rapamycin, which they abbreviated as mTOR, mTOR, mTOR. That's on muscle cells. And it basically says, do we have enough materials to build muscle or not? And when leucine comes along, leucine being an amino acid, we all know that those are building blocks of proteins, but it turns out that it's also a signaling molecule. So this leucine will signal the muscle through the mTOR pathway to start growing. And what's fascinating is if there's leucine or you dump in branched chain amino acids, that'll be helpful. But unless you have all the other amino acids needed for the enzymes to help build this muscle, nothing's going to happen. So muscle will not grow unless it gets the signal from protein to do so. That's the takeaway message of this podcast. If you're not feeding enough protein that has leucine in it, muscles won't grow. This is why horses that go on soybean meal, which has leucine in it in good amounts, suddenly start to get a top line, and their muscles of their abdomen tighten up because the muscles are being targeted with this signaling compound called leucine. And if you run out and buy branched chain amino acids and you throw it into your horse because you've got millions of dollars, it's not going to do the trick, because to build the muscle requires all the other amino acids that are found in a high quality protein, such as milk protein. Now, if I don't know anybody who's feeding milk protein to horses. I don't see why it couldn't be. Milk protein is 20% whey protein, which a lot of horse feeds have tried whey protein in the past. It's relatively expensive, so you don't find it that much. But 80% another protein called casein. So you have casein and whey combination. And when you combine those two, you have significant muscle growth in humans. Now, if you drink it as milk, you're going to also have the sugars in there. And if you have full fat milk, you're going to have the fat in there. So you're going to have high calories. I hate to say the word calories, but you have a high turnover of that into accumulation of fat. But what they've done research on is they've taken milk protein, and they've shown that that milk protein is easily absorbed in the intestines of humans, and that goes through to the muscles, and it stimulates the muscles to grow through this mTOR pathway. So if you think that running up and down hills or riding your horse hard and feeding him only grass and limited monograsses of hay, and then you're adding some hay, grain, they're not going to lose their muscle today. But over time, as they hit 12 to 18 years old, you're going to say, oh, they're starting to look old. And 18 to 24, their top line starts to look really bad. You've retired them. Their suspensories are broken down. This is because they are continually chewing up their protein to make sure that their daily needs are met. And they're tapping into the protein storage, which is muscle and other things, neurotransmitters, everything. It's just that pool of recycled amino acids from all the proteins in the body are susceptible to gluconeogenesis and making glucose to keep the animal alive, because you have too much glucose coming in and it's shutting down the glucose absorption into the cells, and they're sedentary, so they're not using them. So all that glucose has to be converted into body fat. So your horse gets fatter, and to keep the horse alive, the brain is using 25% of all the glucose. And so it has to go to the liver and say, hey, turn your free amino acids into sugar and feed me so I don't die. Nobody's ever studied this in horses. This is what happens in humans. If you go to a zero carb diet and you start switching over to ketone productions, all those ketones can go into your brain and they can be used for fuel. So now it doesn't need as much sugar, so it's not going to break down as much muscle. So in the vegetarian, such as the horse, there is still a lot of sugar in these plants called starch. And as long as the horse is moving, it's going to be using up that starch. It's going to convert the cellulose into fat. The problem is the hay that you feed in January, February, March, or in the middle of winter was last summer's grass that's high in starch. So they're getting that extra starch load all through the winter, in addition to whatever grains you're feeding. So they're on a high carbohydrate diet, and it's causing the muscles to break down. mTOR isn't there. You're not giving high quality protein that has leucine in it. So leucine is not stimulating the muscle to grow. So it's fading away. It's a crisis. They had a really interesting name for it. And I don't know if I can find it right away, but it is a crisis in older people that go into the hospitals. And when they go into, it's called anabolic resistance. So anabolic pathways are things that grow muscle and grow your body. And this is anabolic resistance. So you have these old people who are sitting in the hospital, either they voluntarily went in for a hip replacement, let's say, or they involuntarily went in because they fell down and broke something. So they're in the hospital, and the hospital, according to this guy, still is not feeding enough high quality protein. And worse, these older people aren't eating a lot. So they get the double whammy. And so their muscles just fall apart. And this is why 25% of all humans who are 65 years of age that break a hip will be dead within 1 year. That's statistics. And it's all because they've lost muscle mass. And in fact, in humans, almost every person I talk to or listen to that's talking about longevity, health span, places building muscle as your number one priority. The more muscle you build, the more places you can put excess glucose, the more places you can put excess fat that's not body fat, and the more healthy you are, because there's less inflammation caused by inflamed body fat cells. So in the horse, we can do this through diet by making sure the horse has plenty of protein. And the goal, I've said 100 times, is between 1/2 and 1 gram of high quality protein, or just any protein, per pound of body weight. So 1,200 pound horse would get between 600 and 1,200 grams of protein. And if you're into the metric system listening to this, it's 1.1 to 2.1 grams of protein, or 2.2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight. So it boils down to, I forgot. You just have to multiply 1.1 times what's 1,200 pounds, 500 and some odd kilos. So it's still about 600 grams. So you still have to be putting in that much protein into your horse. And it's easy to do. Most horses love soybean meal. Now, there's a lot more to go over, especially if you look at how bodybuilding builds up type 2 fibers. And that's really important because there's something called Catabolic Crisis. And that's basically anabolic resistance. We're having a catabolic crisis in our horses. And I think it's a great way of looking at it. We're seeing our horses become obese, but if you stripped away all that fat, you'd see a catabolic crisis. And we need to do something about it. This is why I'm so gung-ho into getting you to start feeding high quality protein and reduce the amount of sugar that's getting into your horse's mouth. because doing those two things, and especially feeding inflammatory foods, such as seed oils or any of these mixtures that have more than one ingredient in it, pardon me, they have like 20 ingredients, half of which you don't even know. They're just inflaming the cells so that the amino acids can't get in there. The inflammation is high. With inflammation, you get cortisol. Cortisol is like insulin in the fact that it's will cause your body to store more fat and break down more muscle. I don't think I want to go any further on this podcast because I know that as I give you this information, sometimes it's almost overwhelming for you. And I've done a couple of half-hour podcasts, and this will be another one. Just know that if you want to build muscle in your horse, you cannot do it by exercise alone. It is impossible. I don't care who you are. Look at any bodybuilder out there, any athlete out there, ask them what their eating protocol is, and they will tell you we put protein first. If you want your horse to be an athlete, why aren't you putting protein first? High quality protein and reduce the amount of sugar. If your horse is working hard and depleting its glycogen storage, fine, add the oats. Your horse is a 3-year-old racing its heart out at the Kentucky Derby, and it's running a race like to save its life. It's going to use up every drop of glucose. Get the oats in them. You've got to replenish that glucose to get them ready for the next race. And you also have to replenish the fat in the body cell, in the muscle cell, to make them ready for the next race. Those who don't do it are going to fail. And you have to be feeding high quality protein to make sure that the muscles that horse is saying, hey, I need more muscles to run faster or pull the plow or go the distance up and down the hills, whatever your sport is. Even the dressage and jumpers, you're lifting that body weight up and over a fence so many feet off the ground or meters. You have to make sure that the muscles are strong. And all the connective tissue, such as tendons and ligaments, they're made up of collagen. And collagen is not like the muscle fibers. They don't need them. They need basically proline and glycine, which is what collagen is. But if you're feeding a high quality protein, it's going to have proline and collagen in there. Now, I personally add collagen to my drinks because it's so easily mixable, and collagen is really good. But I also add that to my steak because if I get knocked down by a horse and I have to brace myself or get knocked up in a car, I want everything working for me. I want all my collagen working. I want all my muscles working. And this is why I'm crazy about eating protein and cutting out sugar in my diet. And it will work for your horse. It will work whether you're a vegetarian or a carnivore. It makes no difference. It'll work for your horses. So there you have it. To build muscle in a horse, you need to signal the muscle that the nutrients are there. If you don't signal it, and that's leucine coming in and hitting the mTOR pathway that's in the sarcolemma, which is the cell of the muscle. If it doesn't get that signal, it says, sorry, not going to build muscle for you. And you can run and jump and play all you want and keep feeding grain. And the only signal that muscle is getting is, whoa, I'm replacing myself. I'm doing this every 50 to 100 days in a human. I'm going to guess that in a horse. And my amino acids that I send off and recycle don't come back because they're abducted and turned into glucose to keep the brain going, to keep the horse going, to survive. And over time, the muscles get smaller and smaller and smaller. It's happening to your grandparents. It's happening to the people at the mall. It's happening to anybody who doesn't take care of themselves and eat more protein. This isn't me talking. This is thousands of other people who are studying this all the time. They're saying the same thing. So take a word of advice. Don't be afraid of adding soybean meal. If you don't like soybean meal, hey, go out and buy some milk protein. I mean, you can find dried milk anywhere and you can start adding that. You know, look at the protein that's available and see what your horse does. Let me know how it goes. I'm just not going to do that. Milk protein is from an animal and it doesn't make sense. I'd rather feed something that is made that horses eat, which are legumes. And legumes like alfalfa and clover and birds for trefoil and peanut hay also include soybeans. They're in the same group. And they have these seeds that we take the hulls off, which have the lectins in it. We suck out the inflammatory seed oils. We heat it so it's denaturing an enzyme that prohibits the absorption of protein. And you're left with something that I've been using since 1973, and it's helped horses around the world. So don't be afraid of adding high quality protein. With this podcast, you have another reason to do that. So I hope that helps. This is Doc T. I will try and think up of another subject. I would love it if you guys comment, let me know what you think. Give me some other ideas to talk about, and I'll see you the next time. Thanks for listening, and share this. Appreciate it. Bye.
Hey everyone, Doc T here. Thank you for listening to my content. Would you do me a huge favor? Would you please subscribe, comment, like, thumbs up, and give a star review? However it's presented to you, I want you to do that. There's two reasons. The first, of course, is to improve this product. This way I know what you like, what you don't like, what I can improve upon, what topics you want me to cover. But more importantly, it's also going to help others find me. And by doing that, you are now engaged in this mission of helping horses thrive in a human world. By you helping, we can reach others. And that I would be so grateful for. And remember, go to thehorsesadvocate.com for updates on this information. Thehorsesadvocate.com. And again, thank you so much for being here. Doc T out.